As U.S. Vice President Mike Pence finished his trip to the Republic of Korea, a White House official is reported to have said that the decision to deploy THAAD would rest with the Republic of Korea's new president. Is this yet another about turn in U.S. foreign policy? And on the internet, a giraffe is born while another man is confessing he has killed somebody. Are these the two extremes of the wonders of the internet? I'm Li Xing in Beijing. Welcome to The Point. To start off, the sudden announcement from London earlier today that the Prime Minister Theresa May wants to call a general election 3 years earlier than is actually necessary caught most observers by surprise. For months, Theresa May has played down the prospect of an early general election, and many in the ruling Conservative Party had believed there was so little chance of the main opposition Labour Party getting its act together before 2020 that they could carry on until then and still expect a sizable majority in Parliament. But stepping back a little in order to see the wood from the trees, it appears clear that with Theresa May having only a small majority in Parliament, this gave backbenchers significant power to force the government to back down on a variety of issues. Instead, opinion polls suggest that if she went to the country now, she would win a very clear mandate that would considerably strengthen her hand in any negotiations she will have with Brussels over the terms of the UK's decision to leave the EU. In politics, they say timing is everything, and it may not be overstating it to say that Theresa May's political instincts could well change the course of British history, at least as far as its relationship with mainland Europe is concerned. U.S. Vice President Mike Pence finished a 3-day tour to the Republic of Korea on Tuesday. A White House official traveling with Pence is reported to have said on Sunday the decision to deploy the U.S. missile defense system THAAD would rest with the ROK's next president to be decided by election on 9th of May. But the very next day, Pence said during a joint press conference with the ROK's acting president Hwang Kyo-an that the U.S. will continue to deploy THAAD. What's behind this apparent inconsistency from the U.S.? To find out more, I'm joined from Boston by Dr. Jim Walsh of MIT's Security Studies program and Professor Chung-In Moon from the Department of Political Science at Yonsei University in Seoul. Welcome, gentlemen, to the show. Now, acting President Hwang said that the U.S. and the ROK have agreed to further strengthen the readiness of their alliance in response to the DPRK's growing threat by ensuring the early deployment and operation of THAAD. This is now what Vice President Pence said during the press conference.
We will continue to deploy the THAAD missile defense system as a defensive measure called for by the alliance and for the alliance.
Now, Dr. Walsh, how do you interpret Vice President Pence's words, "we will continue"? Is his statement a self-contradiction inside the Trump administration or just a soothing response to the ROK's urging for early deployment of THAAD?
I think it's posturing right now. The notion that one of the aides on that trip said that they would wait and see about deploying THAAD until the election and the new president, I think reflects two things. One, an accommodation to reality. If a new president comes into office and is absolutely opposed to the missile defense system, it's very hard to imagine politically that the U.S. is going to force its ally to accept it. So part of that is just political realism. But secondly, it also speaks to the evolving relationship between China and the United States after the summit. Obviously, China and Russia, but particularly China, have expressed their opposition to THAAD, and there seems to be some cooperation blooming in very small ways right now between the U.S. and China. And so this gives the Americans a way out, as well as a little leverage, to say, you know, if you keep helping me, I will help you, and maybe we will slow play THAAD. So both political realism and also reflecting the changing nature of the U.S.-China relationship.
Professor Moon, what is your take on this question?
But I think whoever gets elected as the new president of South Korea, he should go through policy review of the deployment of American THAAD in South Korea, because now there are big debate on the procedural appropriateness of the deployment, the decision to deploy American THAAD system in South Korea. Therefore, I think new president will look into the procedural dimension of the deployment. At the same time, all those candidates were not informed about the decision to deploy American THAAD in South Korea. Therefore, new president will be looking into its military utility and its economic cost and its geopolitical implications. Therefore, I think that if we have a new president, particularly Moon Jae-in, he will look in the case, from very fresh aspect.
Now, from a technical perspective, we are really not long before the presidential election is held. That's beginning of May. Technically, if the United States and the acting government of the ROK at this moment decide to speed up the deployment of THAAD, is it possible for them to finish by that time? Dr. Welsh?
Well, I doubt it. I doubt that very seriously. And moreover, it would be a political slap in the face to the candidates who are currently running. I mean, Mr. Trump came to office wanting to reverse everything that Mr. Obama did, and certainly the likely winner of the South Korean election is going to be a liberal, more liberal than the previous president, President Park. And so he should understand that the new guy coming into office is going to want to make some changes. And they're going to have to work together, right? If the U.S. and South Korea are not on the same page, it's going to be very difficult to make progress on the problem of North Korea. So there's no, I don't think, incentive or payoff for the president to antagonize the candidates before they've even taken office. So I think it makes sense to wait the 30 days. Nothing's going to happen in 30 days. And if they try to rush it and the new president comes in and asks them to dismantle it, that's bad for everyone. That's a no win at all. So that's what I think will happen.
And Professor Moon, let me just be clear what you were saying. Basically, you are saying the plan to deploy the THAAD will be stalled anyway, as the policy will have to be reviewed after the presidential election. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, naturally, and I agree with Dr. Welsh. In other words, South Korean, new president should go through that process. Right now, some members of the National Assembly are thinking about making, petition to the Constitutional Court. Some citizens are about to file for the environmental impact statement, the petition. Therefore, there could be a myriad of, the legal and procedural complaint from the civil society. Therefore, new president should accommodate. Look, South Korea is a country where president was impeached. Therefore, new president cannot ignore the grievances coming from the National Assembly members and the citizens.
Mm-hmm. Now, as for China's most recent response to the deployment of THAAD, let's listen to what the Foreign Ministry spokesperson had to say.
自从美韩双方决定部署萨德反导系统以后
I think everyone has noted that ever since the US and the ROK decided to deploy THAAD in the peninsula, the situation has become more tense instead of cooling down. Security in the ROK is more strained rather than more secure. Thus we urge all involved once again to stop the THAAD deployment immediately.
有关的部署进程。
Dr. Welsh, I want to come to you, and you also mentioned a little bit. Now, since the U.S. has been pressuring China to play a central role in resolving the DPRK nuclear issue, shouldn't China's concern with the THAAD be taken into better consideration so that both sides will have some gains in working harder and cooperating better?
Well, to borrow a phrase from North Korean negotiations past, I would say action for action, word for word. In other words, of course there has to be some reciprocity. Both sides have to try to meet the needs of the other. And so this is what I think that's going to look like. I think we saw China exert some subtle pressure on North Korea over the weekend with a major Chinese newspaper floating the idea of an oil cutoff or a slowdown in oil exports, as well as obviously the temporary ban on flights to Pyongyang. So China is doing part of what the U.S. wants to do, and then China's going to expect something from the U.S. And I'm guessing one of two things, or maybe both. One is they're going to pressure the U.S. to return to the bargaining table, to have direct talks with North Korea, and secondly, to slow down or perhaps freeze the installation of the THAAD missile defense system, which China is very concerned about. Now, I'm not a big fan of THAAD, but I believe the Chinese official probably exaggerates the degree to which THAAD has affected the North Korean situation. I think if we had THAAD or no THAAD, the North Korean situation would be bad right now. You know, there are larger things going on than just THAAD. But obviously, to the Chinese, THAAD is very important. And so I would think that they will press the U.S. And it may be that this hint we had this last couple of days is a sign that there may be some accommodation to that request.
Professor Moon, picking up what Dr. Welsh was saying, putting aside China's concern about THAAD from its own strategic perspective, how do you think the THAAD system is weighing on the DPRK nuclear issue? Do you think THAAD is helping with the situation or making the DPRK going further in their escalation?
Now, once South Korea allowed the deployment of American THAAD in South Korea, then means that could imply that South Korea is not interested in dialogue and negotiation. Therefore, the so-called head-to-head in a confrontation with North Korea. Therefore, that is not desirable. Therefore, none of the THAAD or other issues or sanctions on North Korea should be used as an instrument of bringing North Korea to negotiation table. That is the most important one. There is no other choice but to resolve North Korean problems through dialogue and negotiation. We should keep that in mind very clearly.
Dr. Welsh, my last question to you. What is your assessment of the situation at this moment? Are we closer to an outbreak of war, however long that is, or are we seeing a de-escalation of the situation?
Well, right now, I think we're at an inflection point. And often those two things happen at the same time. As things get more dangerous, there's an opportunity, people sort of focus on the problem, and it creates an opportunity to put it on a different track. So I think we've seen some positive developments, but it all depends on what lessons are learned. If the leaders in Beijing and Washington draw the correct lessons from what happened this weekend, then we might be able to put this on a positive track with negotiations and other policies. But this is very fragile, and it could easily just, begin to spiral down where we have the same old action-reaction. And if we go back to that, it could be very dangerous.
Professor Moon, what is your take on this question?
Now, there is one more observation point. There is on April 25th, there is the 85th anniversary of founding of North Korea's People's Army. And there may be a good chance that North Korea undertake the 6th nuclear testing. Then they can really screw up everything. Therefore, I really hope that North Korea will take a more, reserved posture and try to really come back to negotiation table. Really, I think that, if North Korea undertakes the 6th nuclear testing, there may be a good chance that President Trump could take a military action on North Korea. Therefore, we should, try to avoid that kind of catastrophic development on the Korean Peninsula.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jim Walsh, joining us from MIT, and Professor Chung-In Moon from Yonsei University. And here is my take on this situation. According to the ROK's Chosun media, however, this is slightly different from what we have been talking about. Deployment of THAAD would be the first step towards a nuclear-armed ROK to deal with the nuclear threat from the north. But if it tells us anything, it is that the more you arm yourself, the more you encourage your opposite number to do the same. How on earth could anyone expect the DPRK to denuclearize if at the same time nuclear weapons were to be found in the South or in Japan? If THAAD really were the first step along the road to nuclearizing the South, then this would appear to be an even stronger argument for abandoning THAAD, which is something that both China and Russia have been highly vocal in arguing for. Welcome back. A giraffe named April became an internet sensation after her pregnancy and delivery was live streamed at a zoo near New York since February. At the time of the birth, about 1.2 million people watched it live on YouTube. One day after April's delivery, however, a man in Cleveland posted a video on Facebook of the shooting and killing of a randomly picked old man. The same guy then went live to confess his crime. Police in 5 U.S. states are still hunting him down. How to balance the good side and bad side of the internet? Where to draw the lines in regulating internet content? I'm joined by Ms. Duan Yanling, founder of Niwatata Future Hub, a creative consultancy and design platform, and David Moser, academic director at Capital Normal University in Beijing. Many thanks for joining us on the show. Now, Duan, let me go to you first. What is your first impression upon hearing these two very different stories happening almost at the same time?
I would just realize, even though the online live broadcast is so hard and so on the spotlight, but the spotlight is still caught by the point with Liu Xin. You know, this is still this traditional medium, still enjoy the status as authoritative, as pointing the public attention.
We try to be that, yes.
Pointing the attention to regenerate attention. So I guess the choice of the topic from the public media still is very, very important, what we choose. Whereas one thing is, you know, gunpowder is considered dangerous by the weapon, you know, as a weapon, and also entertaining as a firecrackers. So when this tool is created, we always expect something going to backfire. And one thing I found is really sad or a little bit pity with it is that public education, like edutainment elements, has been really giving a new chance in the web live broadcast, giving these micro communities a chance to be close to the teachers, to be feedback. And there's a pattern, it's so lack of attentions because it's lack of sensational points. So that's giraffe and the killing became the kind of the danger of web live broadcast. That's probably a little bit misunderstanding and give people a little bit off focus of the nature and wonderfulness of this new creation.
David, what was your impression when you heard these two stories happening almost at the same time? Of course, they are not related, but still, when they happened at the same time, it kind of makes you think, right? What was your thought?
Well, I mean, obviously, first of all, there's really no separation or any line between social media, personal media, and the mainstream worldwide media these days. YouTube is a great example of something that a very conceivable kind of content. A lot of it is privately produced, some of it is mass-produced entertainment products, but there's really no dividing line. The other thing is, I think, you know, these are interesting examples because it literally is life and death. Two
Yes.
very natural human processes that people have a great fascination for. And I think that this is really no different than any time in history. People are fascinated with this, but now people have access to images and phenomenon that are very real. They're not manufactured, they're not fake. And I think there's a hunger for reality, for...
There's this rawness there, right?
Yeah, right. There's a hunger for that sort of thing in a world where there's so much fake products, fake news, and so many manufactured emotions. These are real stories in there, and you can see them happening before your eyes. So for good or bad, they capture a lot of the imagination and attention of the world media.
Yeah. Well, in February, the video of April the giraffe was blocked shortly and flagged for nudity and sexual content. Now, of course, there are people who are extremists when it comes to animal protection, and the the owner of the zoo said that there is a handful of these people that may not agree with the idea of using these kind of means to educate people. How do you see the arguments for and against the live streaming?
The law today, when it's so decentralized, I guess at the end of the day, it truly is like this real organic system of internet. The two point is its self-regulations, because it is gone out of control and it's doomed to be out of control because it's completely decentralized. What is really need to be stressed, probably how to in fact that why we are focused on this nudity of the zoo instead of focusing on something maybe less mundane, maybe a little bit spend your time in the better areas. I guess that's a question it probably can be raised once again.
Yeah, David, what do you think was the motivation behind the people who are flagging such obviously harmless content, you know, for being sexually explicit?
Oh, you have to laugh. I don't know. I think that the tendency with all things like this is once they gain media attention, there are many parties that see a chance to actually attach themselves to the story and achieve a lot of attention and you know, press on their own.
Yeah.
Maybe some people really believe this, and they think that now is the time that they should speak out.
There were
For
also
me,
people who were talking about respecting the animals' privacy.
Yeah, right. I mean, yeah, I mean, it's hardly worth considering, except that it's a serious point that once you open up the doors to freedom of expression and free speech, then you can't really, it's not that easy to close it off, and you have to sort of take whatever you get.
What about the commercial aspect of this? I mean, Toys R Us, this brand, saw the huge opportunity and jumped in the middle of it, and all of a sudden you see this big sign of this toy company at the bottom, at the corner of the screen all the time when people watched it. What do you think of the commercial part of it? Is that controversial? Is there anything controversial about that? Yanling, maybe?
I wouldn't say that's controversial. It's a very good business with catching eyeballs and catching the wallet. That's just a very traditional way of doing business.
Well, let's take a look at this second story, of course. What do you think is the motivation of this man going online, posting such horrible video and then confessing the crime that he did? David, what do you think he would want to do that?
Well, people are disturbed, and I think there's a sad fact of modern day life that people are absorbed in the media. They watch TV. You know, we have a president who seems to be obsessed with TV news, and these images can feed off into one's own psyche, and people find it very naturally to sort of take their own disturbances, the things that they feel angry about, and to assert themselves and to put themselves into the media that everyone is watching. And I think that's just an example of what we have here. Frankly, I'm amazed that this doesn't happen more often, because Facebook is there, available, live streaming is very common. It's surprising to me, I mean, thank heavens this doesn't happen every day, because I think it could.
Well, I hope, yeah, by talking about it, we don't make more people aware of this, you know, possibility, crazy possibility. Now, the brutal murder footage was allowed to stay online for more than 2 hours before it was taken down. Facebook came under fire for it. Justin Sorofsky, Facebook's vice president for global operations, said in a statement that we disabled the suspect's account within 23 minutes of receiving the first report about the murder video and 2 hours after receiving a report of any kind, but we know we need to do better. So what do you think can be done better, Yanling? Is there anything that can be done at all?
I do understand that there's their responsibility to control the medium, the flow, but at the same time, again, I would stress that self-regulation is up to us to ignore. You know, the best method to feedback of those negativity and the horrible incident is to completely ignore it and take distance from it. I guess that's every.
Well, sometimes it's too late to ignore it, because the moment sometimes you just don't know what you're going to see, right? And until you see it, you realize that, you know, it's a piece of problematic video. David, what is your answer to this question?
Well, I think you're right. I think that with something like Facebook, with social media that has an immediacy, there's really not much you can do. Once the image is there, it's too late. Too many people have seen it. This is beyond the scope of this program, but I think part of the problem is that, you know, Duanling mentioned the notion of infotainment, that we have too much media and news now that is so connected to the profit motive that the news outlets cannot resist putting this stuff out there because it's going to earn them money. I think that maybe the ultimate solution is to try to make more of a separation between pure news and entertainment, and that way stories like this will go away very quickly because their actual news value is very slight. This is just a tragedy, and it does not deserve, you know, tens of hundreds of millions of viewers obsessing about it, even though it is a tragedy.
Yeah, well, the live broadcasting boom, I'm glad you mentioned that, because it is a huge phenomenon in China as well, and that has been accompanied by plenty of criticism. For instance, what you just mentioned, people actually pay, or they give tips, virtual tips, for a good broadcast in their eyes. Now, sometimes to attract that kind of profit, people would do all kinds of things. Now, the Cyberspace Administration of China, or CAC, released new policies that took effect on December the 1st last year on live streaming industry, requiring content providers to obtain qualification and set rules on monitoring user data. But it seems that some platforms are still promoting vulgar content to attract viewers. What can be done to effectively put these policies into action? It's a difficult question, but I have to ask you this. Yanling?
how to properly to fit with more high quality encourage more educational content on that. You know, there's just that much space or attention span or airtime for each viewer. So if they have more opportunity to see the positive content, useful content, probably will give it less space for the negative one. On the second point of view, it's probably also make this attention spans or this spectral, we relax the reality of this is just reality being exposed. Used to be this much spectrum, but now much wider. Is the reality is this is who we are, what we are here today. That's how it is.
Yeah, David, what is your take on this situation? And often, the frustration is the regulators are chasing the innovators, right? The innovators have already been 2 miles down the lane, and the regulators trying to catch up. And by the time they catch up, the people are already way ahead again. So what can be done?
Yeah, it is kind of a cat and mouse game, isn't it? The innovators are always way ahead of the people who are trying to regulate. I think it's a trade-off. I think that we have to accept that that some of this is going to get out. It's really not a new problem. It's just been exacerbated by the World Wide Web and by the explosion of new kinds of social media and the way we consume them. There's really not much you can do. I think the ultimate solution is sort of as just now that Dunling suggested, which was that we have to make other more worthwhile content and healthier and more edifying content more attractive, move people more in that direction instead of always going to the lowest common denominator. Unfortunately, there's really nothing else you can do.
Yeah, we're trying our best to make better content TV. Thank you very much for joining us on the show. That was Duan Yanling, founder of THAAD Future Hub, and David Moser, academic director at Capital Normal University. Thank you for joining us. And here is my last point. Just like with all types of media, there are both good and bad things that come about because of their presence. When printing was first invented, I'm sure that many would have argued that as well as spreading knowledge, it could also have negative connotations. The internet is no different in that sense. What is different is the fact that it is much more powerful in its speed and reach. Well, tomorrow will be another day, but we'll have learned a bit more about the power and hidden dangers of that thing in your hands. That's all for this edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin. Download the CGTN Live application to watch our show live on that thing in your hands. Follow me on Facebook and Twitter using the handle The Point with LX, and you can watch our previous shows on the CGTN channel of YouTube. Click on the playlist and look for The Point with Liu Xin. Thank you for watching. I'll see you tomorrow at the same time.